Have you ever thought about hiring a managed security service provider, even though you have internal IT staff? Well, if you have, this is the podcast to listen to. I'm Aaron Reed with RPM Technologies, and today I've got Chris Prater, our CEO, and friend of the team, Jason Sloan, to talk about that very thing. Chris and I were talking the other day, and we were talking, back at lunch, that there are some specific advantages that an MSSP might have, or a managed security service provider might have, versus an internal IT team. And I think we kind of, being in the business, we know what they are, but how would you explain some of that unique advantage to somebody that just has an internal IT team, maybe of two, maybe of one, just servicing them day to day?
So I think it really comes down to a few different factors that impact the internal IT staff around what their day-to-day priorities are and what gives them more of a immediate return.
Like everything's on fire, right? All the time.
Yeah. So I may have, as an internal IT person, I may have the responsibility to do proactive security things like keeping things patched and checking logs and doing all of those types of activities and account management and things like that. However, when I show up to work, no matter how well-intentioned or intelligent I might be about all those things, the boss has something else for me to do that day, or something breaks, or other things take a priority on a day-to-day. And because the proactive security activities don't have an immediate return, it's really easy to be distracted and go focus on whatever the challenge of the day is, or the next new project, and the things that actually show more of an immediate return, immediate gratification for that individual or the company to get something done from an IT perspective or get something fixed. So the internal IT staff in that way is kind of an immediate disadvantage for staying on top of this proactive stuff because they get distracted.
Well, I think you said proactivity. That's kind of the key term there, right? Because everybody comes in and looks for whatever that fire is that they react to, and security is really about being more proactive, right? Plug the holes before you know they're holes, right?
Well, it is, and it's also kind of an insurance play if you think about it too, because the likelihood of an event happening, although it's changing these days and getting worse and worse, it still is kind of relatively low as compared to the likelihood of someone's printer breaking that day or whatever. So,
right.
You're doing these activities to prevent something that might not happen for a while, and you don't know. But so because of that, it gets deprioritized. Not to mention the fact that for most IT people, unless they're a security analyst specifically, career-wise and everything else, they're not all that interested in this activity. It's not necessarily fun, pouring through logs.
It's not sexy.
No. And
it's
so
not spy games.
They deselect the activity as well because it's not showing an immediate gratification or immediate return to the business. It's not that fun. It's rote. A lot of it has to do with documentation and keeping up with those things and checking the same thing every day, every week, every month. And it's boring unless you're a security professional, which again goes back to the benefit side to talk about the positive of outsourcing this activity to an MSSP, where those things kind of get flipped upside down because your MSSP is going to have those dedicated security resources that they spread across multiple customers and multiple scenarios, so they remain interested. They may remain interested in their job. They certainly focus on security every day, and the fact that they have multiple customers gives them the benefit of seeing things more than if they were an internal IT person working for a single company in a single infrastructure.
There's something to be said about specialization. I'll use a non-technical analogy. My wife and I years ago had our basement finished, and we hired somebody that had a full-time job, and on the weekends, he was finishing our basement, doing all the carpentry, doing everything. And it took forever, and we didn't have contracts in place. There were problems. We vowed right then and there, never again will we hire somebody that's not specialized and doesn't do it full-time, because they're dedicated. And like you said, they see it every single day. They're versed in it. They're versed in the contracts. They're versed in everything. And I think that's the point that you're getting to, is that when you outsource this kind of thing, it's a dedicated professional. It's a dedicated service that is working 24 hours a day.
Yeah, and I'll actually play with that analogy too, because we're going to bring the right tools with us as an MSSP, right? So people don't like to outlay a lot of capital to buy tools, but we'll bring the tools with us. We know how to use them. We're experts at them, so there's no learning curve internally if you were to buy your own tools and try to set them up.
No YouTube videos on
no
trying
YouTube,
to figure out how to stop phishing attacks.
How did Billy Bob do this? Let me see. Oh, yeah, there you go.
Well, and I think another point is that it's not just the IT person that's spread so thin. The entire company is spread so thin with labor shortages and owners expecting more out of everybody. Everybody's wearing more than one hat. So it gets pushed down on the priority list, but it's also, these things happen in the shadows. These attacks happen on your system and you don't see it happening. So the people that should be paying attention don't know what they're supposed to pay attention to because they're so spread thin as well.
Yeah. People are rushing through things and just trying to get stuff done. That's actually a really good point about just the lack of manpower everywhere, right? Is that one, they may not have the expertise, and two, they just don't have the time.
Yeah.
Right?
Or care.
No, or care sometimes.
It's not their company.
Unfortunately, yeah, it's not my dollars, but I mean, it is and it isn't. When when a hacker will burn down your business for $20 and then you're out of job, I guess it does become your problem at that point.
Right.
But yeah, we'll get a little.
And the hackers don't stop when you clock out.
That's true. Actually, that's very true. When you look at the times of major breaches, they fall on holidays, they fall on nights, they fall on weekends because they know there's no one around, watching to catch them, or it's less likely that they get caught.
Oh, I heard they only operate between 9 and 5 in your time zone.
Yes, bankers' hours.
Yes,
correct.
Bankers.
Yes.
Bankers.
2-hour lunches.
Hackers are union.
It's actually a really good point because what's becoming very important in the security space these days is 24-hour SOC SIEM operations and threat hunting and stuff like that. And unless you're a big company and you build your own, I mean, those things generally don't get built internally for that reason.
Yeah,
and
it's a
your
big
MSSP
lift.
is going to bring that to you 24/7, and that's key because those attacks, it doesn't matter what time it is, they're up all night, 24/7 doing the work. So.
And you brought this up earlier. It's automated. It's not a guy sitting in his mom's basement, hacking away and typing on a computer. It's a bot. It's searching for this kind of thing, and it's sending it out millions and millions of times over and over and over and over. And it's not just one person. It's constant.
We touched a little bit on expertise. I mean, what do you normally see as sort of the expertise of an small in-house IT team?
Depends on how small, right? I mean, so you go to the pretty small SMB space where there's one person or something like that, or maybe if it's even outsourced or whatever. And it's not that these folks are not skilled and intelligent and everything else. They are, and we're not knocking them individually. But nowadays, any one IT person says they can do everything. They're
selling you a bill of goods.
They're lying, or they don't know what they're talking
Maybe
about.
a little cocky.
And I don't think that, and they don't generally do that. They know that. But even when you have a little bit bigger IT shop, the dedicated security professional is not usually one of the first 4, 5, 6, 8, 10 people that a company will hire as they grow and build an internal shop. They need people to take care of the network. They need people to take care of the end users and PCs and, email and all the functioning things, or their applications and programming. So the dedicated security professional for an internal shop, they certainly exist, but it usually doesn't come into play as a dedicated position until the company gets a little bit bigger. And the other reason is that unless it's a fairly large and complex environment, it's very difficult to keep high-end, experienced technical professionals in security interested. So that's where an SMB is, again, at a disadvantage, and they usually end up with a generalist who may be very good and may be perfect for all the day-to-day stuff and everything else, and they're actually probably decent at doing security things. It just goes back to what I said earlier about it doesn't happen because it gets deprioritized in the list of things that they do. And that's really the gist of it. Whereas When you outsource it to an MSP, you get all the things we talked about, the specialists and the procedures and the tools and all of that kind of stuff. But you also get the incentive that that partner has to deliver the service that you're paying for. Because if they don't and something happens, then they're at fault. They're liable. They get fired at best. They get sued at worst. Mm-hmm. And so the MSSP has the counter to the internal. The MSSP has the right motivations to make these things the priorities, which benefits them and you as the customer employing their services to make sure that stuff gets done.
And when you're talking about internal IT and them wearing a lot of hats and maybe not having a lot of exposure to different things, I mean, you kind of get into the small shops that also kind of say, well, why do they want me? They're not gonna come after my little company. Which, I mean, Jason, your company wasn't very big that you were working at, right? I mean, in your story.
Yeah, no, we had a cyber attack at a company that I used to work for. We had an IT person that fits the description exactly what you're
general practitioner.
General practitioner, but also wearing more than one hat, not just, dabbling in HR and dabbling in other things because it's a small company and
reacting as best they could, right?
Exactly. And you hit the nail on the head there. It's more reactive than it is proactive. Mm-hmm. So I work out of my house at this job, and I went to send an email and nothing happened, nothing went through. So I tried to send a few more emails because I thought maybe it was just that person's server. I'm not technical. I don't know what's going on. So I texted the person at our office that would have received the email, and I said, is our email down? And she said, yes, as a matter of fact, we are, but that's all we know right now. Everything's down. We have access to nothing. Well, come to find out a few days later that when the owner of the company came in to log on to his terminal, the screen was black and some lettering came across the bottom of the screen and says, I have all of your servers. You're shut down unless by this day at this time, you give me 1 Bitcoin. And this was back when Bitcoin was $8,000. Now it's gone to 60 and now back to 20.
And almost nobody knew how to get a Bitcoin at that
Nobody
point,
knew
right?
what Bitcoin was unless, you
y'all
bought
get one of them Bitcoins up in here.
It was, I can't use the words that my boss said about Bitcoin.
They're not safe for here, huh?
But ended up having to go to call someone in Chicago. There was an exchange that was the only one at the time. Had to get a wallet, didn't know what a wallet was other than the thing you fold and put in your back pocket. Had no idea.
It's full of receipts.
Yeah, called the FBI. Yeah, exactly. Called the you've seen my dad's wallet. Picked up the phone, called the FBI, and at the time, the FBI said, there is not a whole lot we can do. My boss was flabbergasted. The FBI literally said, pay it.
Oof.
Pay
you hate
the
to hear
Bitcoin.
That. You hate to hear that. I bet they'd have a different stance today, but you're right. I mean, what are they going to do? Invade North Korea to try to get this guy?
Yeah, and who knows if that's where, they even are in North Korea. It could be anywhere in the world.
In Ohio. They could be anywhere.
Exactly. Really. So in the time that it took them to figure out what Bitcoin was, how to get a wallet, how to get it set up, how to transfer the money to get the Bitcoin, and to get the FBI to respond, he had missed the deadline.
Ooh.
So the attacker came on the due time, again on the screen, you're late, 1 more Bitcoin.
So now it's 2 Bitcoin. It's
the late tax, apparently.
Yeah.
So now it's a $16,000 hack. And this is what I thought was so brilliant about this attack was they could have easily asked for $10 million or $5 million. We'll shut your business down, because in that case, you're going to say, okay, let's shut our business down because that's way too. We don't even have that kind of money.
I don't have that kind of cash.
Even if we sold everything we have, we might not have that kind of cash. So they figure out by getting into your system what your financials look like, how much money they can get from you, and which would be the less painful that you would go ahead and pay, and then they would move on to the next one. And to me, that's the brilliance of this scheme.
It's so business-like now. I wouldn't at all be surprised if they had like a subscription to a legit business intelligence service and said, okay, well, these guys are roughly $8 million in revenue, and
that blows my mind.
Worked it backwards, right?
The criminals are organized and have business sense, and
they have call centers. They've partnered. I mean,
what do you mean they have call centers?
in a lot of cases, rather than the words scrolling across the bottom of the screen, we've seen where they say, hey, if you don't understand what a Bitcoin is, call this 800 number. We will walk you through the process and help you get a Bitcoin.
Oh, my.
And almost like a customer service kind of thing.
Okay, I know exactly what my wife's grandmother was taken for her entire life savings by some nefarious people from, I think it was Nigeria or somewhere. And they drained her of her life savings, a couple $100,000,
my gosh,
before she passed away. They're bad people.
They are, they are bad people. Like I said, they'll burn anything. Nothing is sacred in most cases. It's financial gain or political espionage. I mean, those are the main motivators.
Yeah, and I think we talked about this earlier. They might not also be, and this is another example of it being in the shadows. They might be in there just getting information. Mm-hmm. You might not even never know they've been there.
That's true.
So the hurdle for you guys is when you're talking to a prospect or somebody that could use your services, there could be somebody in their system right now.
Absolutely.
Taking their information, taking their credit card information, taking their bank information, and then not burning down the business, but selling that information over and over and over and over again. And the person might not even see the impact.
Data's the new oil. I mean, they sell records all day long on the dark web. Different value for a credit card than, say, a medical record, because you can do a whole lot more with a medical record than you can a credit card that's going to get turned off. But it's very much a business. You see them partner. They'll partner with a larger, more well-known threat group just to pump the ransoms in some cases.
I'm just picturing like a sales force, like a group of people going out.
Got to make so many outbound dials.
Yeah. You get commissions. You get they have networking groups. Wow, it just blows my mind.
You laugh, but it exists.
It does.
100%.
I don't have to hack anything. All I have to do is go find something with a hole in it, and I can sell that information to the larger entity who's going to do something with it. So I made my slice. I got a commission, if you will,
and moved on. Didn't even have to do the work.
Fee.
Right. Lowering my risk, lowering my level of work, lowering my income. But if I do that thousands of times, then it adds up.
Well, at some extent, the little guys probably want to stay off the radar a little bit.
Sure.
Whereas the nation state actors, they don't care. They're just going to say, yeah, mostly that's an act of war, but do something about it.
You said something interesting earlier, Aaron, about a lot of small companies don't think that they're the target. They say, well, we're too small. But I think that's where groups like this that attacked our company, they specialize in small. That's, they do. It's a target-rich environment.
I was talking to a gentleman from CISA the other day, and he said that the little companies, even though they know there's may not be a lot of financial gain there, they will test, and practice on the little companies. So they'll see how long they can get in for, see what they can exfiltrate. They'll see just what they can do with this particular tool set or this particular vulnerability. And then they may have another intended target. It may be somebody in that company's supply chain, but they target them because they know they don't have anybody on staff that's a specific defender. They don't have a CISO. They don't have a lot of standard operating procedures that would protect them from these types of attacks.
And they know that these smaller companies can't go an extended period of time with their system shut down.
That's true too.
It's a lot of lost revenue that's very vital to the company staying afloat.
Yeah. Well, tell me about your case. How were operations impacted? Aside from the $16,000 worth of Bitcoin that probably turned into $100,000.
It doubled pretty quickly after that. Yeah. They also have a foresight apparently financially.
Bitcoin speculators.
The impact to me directly was being able to communicate orders. At this company, the order taking system is pen and paper. So in a sense, we were kind of lucky that they weren't able to shut more of it down.
Okay.
But just being able to communicate orders via email was very hard. Now, you would think, well, that's no big deal. You just make a phone call. Well, there's only one person taking the orders and a group of salespeople and customers calling in the orders. So now this guy is overwhelmed. So you're not shutting down the chain, but you're drastically slowing it down.
Well, and I think that probably opens you up to some customer issues, right? Because if Bob orders this and Sally orders that, and the person says, well, wait a second, was that Bob or was that Sally? Because I don't have the email to go back and reference. Was it X amount or Y amount?
And from my standpoint, I didn't see this, but no invoices. You can't send out any invoices.
Oh, right. Yeah. Financial systems.
Anything that goes out
Definitely
digitally, you can't send it out. Bank accounts, I don't know how they were affected. They were probably exposed, that kind of information. But ACH transfers and all that kind of stuff, they pretty much they shut it down. They shut the whole thing down.
I wonder if you ended up sending any product to people who owed you money and, things like that, because you couldn't see their records.
Oh, right.
Yeah. What their current account status is, and maybe they shouldn't have credit with you right now or whatever.
Right.
Those are all kinds of risks you could be.
Unforeseen consequences that you take for granted every day.
Yeah. Now, did you guys have any kind of cyber insurance or anything like that, or
not that I'm aware of? Okay. No. And like I said, the IT person at the time was not only doing IT, was wearing a lot of different hats.
Gotcha.
And I think it actually the security might have been outsourced, but locally, not to I don't want to say a company, but a person.
Yeah.
Like
a consultant, maybe.
A friend, maybe, that works for
somebody's nephew.
Yeah, exactly. Somebody that works IT for another company, but did this on the side, like my contractor that brought hardcore doors, and we needed hollow core doors, and because he wasn't dedicated to this all the time, he didn't do it all the time. So it's just not the right tool for the right job.
Chris, how would you think that maybe cyber insurance would have changed or impacted the situation if they had cyber insurance?
Well, I'm not sure how long ago this was, but that whole field has changed quite a bit. And, when it first started, it was all your regular insurance companies adding cyber riders to their policies, and they were very loose and they didn't understand. But with anything else, particularly insurance companies, they're going to figure it out after they start to see what they're paying on and why they're paying on and what the factors are, and they start getting their actuaries involved, and they're doing their spreadsheets and figuring it out. So what's happened in the last couple of years is the rigor around underwriting the cyber has gone through the roof. And you're seeing very in-depth questionnaires about your cybersecurity stance as a customer, and you're seeing a lot more denials of cybersecurity coverage, either coverage to begin with or exorbitant premiums or pages and pages of exclusions because your company doesn't do XYZ. They've now determined, they now understand from the cybersecurity community, what's essential to have in your environment. And if you're missing that stuff, you'll get denied. And there's also situations where claims are being denied after the fact.
You have to talk the talk and walk the walk. If you say you're doing it but not doing it, you're gonna get that carved out of your policy and not get coverage, right?
Yeah, we've seen firsthand a few situations where the business had filled out the questionnaire and not done so accurately, then had an issue, and then when the insurance company found out, they came back and denied the claim on the basis that they lied on the form.
Basically, yeah.
Yeah.
Costly mistake.
Yeah.
Oh,
I'm sure.
Mistake.
Yeah, that's, you look at the ROI of insurance and it's none until you need it, right? I mean, and when you need it, you really need it.
Just in case.
So, one of the last things I was going to touch on was, as an MSSP, there are ways to look at that package, look at that bundle, and kind of apply it to hiring, right? So you think, hey, I need to get a couple of things when I bring on a new hire, and it's going to be a laptop, and I got to get their benefit package together. What would you say? Would you just bundle in the cost of the MSSP per person, and that way you budget for a lot of this security proactivity and tool set?
Yes, exactly. I mean, that's
you're like, yes, do that.
Yes, do that. That's what we recommend. I mean, what's changed a lot is, a lot of companies, particularly in the smaller businesses, have viewed IT as a reactive. They have the nephew or the friend or whatever if they don't have somebody internally. And they view it as, let's call them when something breaks, and they pay them $50 an hour or $100 an hour, whatever it is. And that's used to be fine. But again, back to the proactive versus reactive, the proactive is required in the cybersecurity space. And the fact is that it's not inexpensive. And as the small to medium-sized business customers start to look at the cost of upping their cybersecurity posture, if you will.
Actually applying it to a framework and having
and
real goals and real controls.
Yeah, because it's no longer, I have to make sure I buy this $20 antivirus package. It's
way beyond that. That's so 2010.
And so they get sticker shock. They really do. As opposed to paying, that $75 an hour when something breaks, and maybe they're just paying a couple $100 a month when the guy comes around and does whatever. It's in the hundreds of dollars per person per month, a couple $1,000, $3,000 per employee with a computer every year. And so that's quite a difference. So there's a lot of sticker shock there. But to your point, Aaron, I think if people start to think, if businesses start to think of this as, it's another cost of an employee, like healthcare, and a car allowance and buying them a computer and giving them office space or whatever else it is, then they start to budget for it. Then I think it becomes a lot more tolerable.
It's budgeted. It's always in the budget that way, right? And you don't just have this shock of IT investment down the road, right?
Right. So when we talk to customers and try to get them there and get them to understand, sometimes it's, if they understand it, they agree, they've seen the news, they've heard the stories, maybe they had an incident, and they don't necessarily like it, but if you can kind of help them progress to where they need to be, and then that can help a lot and get them in the next budget cycle where they need to be. I think that's the best approach.
Yeah.
I think comparing to the monthly cost that you're talking about to the cost of if there is an attack and there's a shutdown and there's loss of business and loss of money, then maybe they see the light that way.
Oh, definitely.
Because it's pretty significant difference.
Yeah. The risk.
It seems cheap at that point, I guess.
Yeah, the risk is high enough that
right.
You should see it that way, right?
Yeah, and I like to say to that point, we do acquire customers who recently had an event and they felt the pain and it cost them a bunch of money and they don't want to happen again. They don't want it to happen again. So yeah, it seems not that costly at that moment, but it also seems like, I just paid $100,000 in ransom and now my monthly IT costs are going to quadruple. So, so it's like a double shot, So it's almost like, well, let's try to get there before this happens to you.
Yeah.
Right.
So that's always the challenge.
Proactivity is definitely the key. Well, how do you want to get into the liability component, right? Because, a lot of times we get into that because the customer says, I don't want to add MFA because it's too hard, or I don't want to, do any kind of zero trust because I want my people to just download everything and install it. It's too cumbersome for me to listen to all their complaints, so I'm not going to do it. And we say to them,
right.
No.
So what you're seeing a lot of IT service providers start to actually either deselect customers because they won't move in the direction they need them to do, because what they're feeling is the oncoming liability to the MSSP for their customers not doing the things they need to do. So go back to the scenario where the cyber insurance denied the claim because they weren't doing something that they said on the form. If you had a scenario where that business outsourced their security to an MSSP and that happened, you could see a situation where the MSSP could get pursued, by the business. Hey, you're our IT company. Why didn't you have this covered? Now the cyber insurance claim's been denied because we're not doing this. Why aren't you doing that? And you get into a whole mess, and it becomes potentially the liability or the perception of the liability of the MSSP, because in those situations, a business is always going to try to push their risk somewhere else, right? Of course, you don't blame them to do that. So that's the downside of that scenario. But back to the other part of why is external better than internal? In that situation, you now have an increasing imperative on the MSSPs to make sure that this stuff is done right. So an internal IT person is not going to get sued by the company if something happens in this scenario and they weren't doing these proactive security things that they were supposed to be doing.
It all belongs to the MSSP.
They probably won't get fired either, right? So they don't have a lot of incentive, to protect themselves. Whereas a service provider is exactly the opposite, because they're getting paid explicitly to do this function. And if they don't do it, they could be held accountable. And it's not clear right now, but it seems like the laws are changing, and they'll kind of actually start moving in that direction, where there'll be some legal precedents at some point where, some MSP got sued and they lost, because they said they were doing something and they weren't. I wouldn't be surprised if that hasn't already happened. I personally don't know if it has. It probably has. It's not that something that they would advertise, right?
And getting sued for something that's essentially breach of contract, you didn't do what you said you were going to do, pretty much makes every customer you have question your competency, your professionalism, and whether you're doing what they think you're doing for them as well, right? It's kind of an ender for an MSSP, right, to not follow through.
It is, and that sounds all depressing for
Doom
the
and
MSSP.
gloom, right?
However, I flip it over and say that this is a positive for the business entity looking to outsource to the MSSP, because yes, they have to do it right, and you have to go through the vetting process and make sure you pick a reputable MSSP and understand to some degree what they're doing and that it's comprehensive and they're doing everything right. But once you've got that set properly, then you do have a higher degree of confidence that it's being done, because Definitely. They have to do it. Otherwise they're gonna go out of business.
Yeah.
When something happens and it's too much of an impact. I know for our company, we couldn't let that happen because it's just essential. We have to do it. So therefore, those things that we were talking about before that get deprioritized, or they're not interesting, or things like that, we don't have a choice but to do them.
Well, we covered a lot of ground today, guys. Chris, Jason, I want to thank you both for your time today. You had excellent ideas, some great topics that we covered, and look forward for more of these in the future. If you need cybersecurity help or you're having trouble identifying business risk, feel free to reach out to us at RPM Technologies.